Yo no las sí que te pillan y están malísimas. Pues yo me iba a olvidar. Y esto tira fotos, pero claro, tirando unos a otros. Y yo me dices, claro, porque se van con la luz buena, pues también.
Buenas tardes a todos, a todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here in this very interesting session, a panel entitled Proposals from the Academia for a Future Law on Working Time Use Policies. We have Marta Junquet with us. She's been around for 3 days. She's the co-coordinator of the Time Use Week Initiative for a Healthy Society. Hello, Marta. And then we will hear from Ana Jimenez. She will, I don't know where she is, but she will connect online. She is the full professor of labor law at ESADE. And then Maria Luz Vega from the Complutense University and former official at the International Labour Inspection, and Raquel Serrano, Professor of Labour Law at the University of Barcelona, and Daniel Redondo, who is a doctoral student at the Complutense University of Madrid. Hello, Daniel. Well, as you know, the government has publicly expressed that they want to pass time use bill, and this morning the State Secretary mentioned precisely this initiative, and we will spend now 2.5 hours to discuss the law. There will be a proposal made. This is all open, and we will have some Q&A and discussion at the end, and we want to hear from you, your suggestions, remarks, questions, and that's about it. So let's get started, because you're not here to listen to me. So I will briefly tell you about the housekeeping side of the session. We will have an initial part in which we will discuss why we need this law, which are the reasons that underlie the need for that law, and then secondly, we will discuss the following considerations, thinking about the law specifically. We will briefly discuss working time use organization, but not everything is working in life, so we will have a more cross-cutting vision, and we will close with some Q&A, as I said before, and I will officially close the session with a summary of the main takeaway messages. And before I hand it over to Marta, if you want to take part in the session or post on social media, we are using the hashtag #TimeUseWeek. That's the hashtag for social media, and I encourage you to disseminate the message. And without further ado, I hand it over to Marta, who will tell us about improving time uses in Spain. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. We're very excited and pleased to have this discussion session, because as the Barcelona Time Use Initiative, we are an organization in charge of promoting time use policies locally, nationally, and internationally. And for some months, since we heard that the Spanish government was planning a time use law, well, we thought it was the right time to make proposals and to discuss the potential considerations of that law. And we're here to share a series of ideas that we have been working on, all of us panelists, and we have also worked with international and national stakeholders who have contributed to the ideas that we're here to share with you. As Danny said, this is a session for discussion, so we would love to hear from you. because these are ongoing reflections. So I'll go straight to slide number 3, if I can have the remote, thank you. And I will briefly present the topic, the key notions to all of you. As the Barcelona Declaration states, that was signed last year in 2021 by over 100 international organizations, from the academia, unions, employers organizations, public organizations, and the civil society. Well, time is a political matter, and therefore it can be considered as a right of all citizens. We think that when we say that we want to work on a time use law, it should guarantee the right to time for all citizens. There are many studies that point out that the way in which we organize our time determines the social model in which we live, and therefore we need to adapt it to each season, to each moment. Spain, as you know, was the first state in the world to pass a bill with an 8-hour working day in all labor sectors, and this was done after like an Adenka strike and many other strikes, demonstrations, and huge work by the workers movement. And 100 years after that, we still have these wrong working hours. So it's high time we rethought the time uses that we implement today, if they allow us to strike a balance. So today, Spain could be the first country in the 21st century to pass a holistic law on time uses, and that's why we believe that it's a golden opportunity, and that's why we are making some of these proposals. Some background information here. As you know, and my colleague Mariluz will explain this better, but the first convention that was signed by the ILO in 1919 was about the working hours. So that was a central topic back then. And today, a century later, the ILO has come up with this notion of decent, dignified work. And to achieve that, we need the right or balanced time organization. There are other factors that we need to take into consideration here, and this was said by the State Secretary in the morning. There are several international recommendations, directives and conventions that have been transposed to the Spanish law, and therefore will allow us to make headway in time uses. And in our country, and well, the pandemic triggered that, well, we have changed the way we connect professionally, the way we take care of each other, and the way we have a social life. So new time users have to reflect that. And I'm sure that many of you have said probably in the last day or in the last week, well, I'm exhausted, I have no time whatsoever. So there's a general malaise that explains that we're not happy with the time uses that we have today. So it's good news that in the government plan for this term, they want to pass this bill on rational time uses. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we say that the time used by Rowan Owen of the 8-hour working day meant that we had to strike a balance between 8-hour working day, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for recreation. But he overlooked a consideration, and that is that when women joined the labour market massively, well, care work is there, and someone has to do it. And then that's why we want that the new time uses will have to strike a better balance between work, rest, care, and recreation. These 4 dimensions are essential for life. care. I said care in Catalan and not in Spanish, sorry. So, this said, what do we propose as a cross-cutting vision? What we propose as a team is a balance in time uses. This was not born overnight but the ILO talks about balance. And regarding the 4 dimensions, work, rest, care, and recreation, we need to find a new balance, and the new balance has to be based on 4 principles: health and well-being, and this one has to be the main principle, because the new time users should allow us to lead a better life. Another key pillar is equality, and in the morning the Secretary of Feminisms at the Equality and Feminisms Department of the Catalan government talked about these policies precisely. And if we are healthier and we live in a more egalitarian society, this will entail a higher productivity. So this doesn't go against businesses or labor organizations. No, we will work together so that we can all be more efficient collectively. And this has to be connected to sustainability. We are living in the midst of a climate emergency, and we need more balanced time uses so that we can be more sustainable. And we believe that even if the Labour Ministry promotes the new law, it should not exclusively focus on the labour side of things, because time is like a jigsaw. As we said in previous sessions, it's true today that work plays a key, a fundamental role to make ends meet. But it's not only about working or labour matters. We need to take into account the other 4 dimensions that we mentioned. And in order to draft the law, the other possibility that we are using is to look for measures and actions that can be implemented. We're checking best practices, examples and experiences of other municipalities that are key spaces for change. So we will be benchmarking quite a lot. And now Anna can tell us more about the reason why we are making this proposal here. But let me first share 3 main pieces of information. And of course, Spain has its own problem apart from the global issue that time uses pose. So compared to the rest of the world, and not only the north of Europe, this is quite a cliche, Portugal and Italy have better and healthier time uses than we have. You can see it on the graph here. So compared with the rest of the world, Spain has a too long lunch break, which means that we have less free time or available time in the afternoon and evening. And that means, in turn, that we go to bed later. I will not delve into the graph here. You can check it. These are the conclusions. As I said, Spain, we are the ones, the late owls. We sleep less in Spain, and if you sleep 20 minutes less on a daily basis means that we are less competitive and we have worse health. We do less sport than in the rest of Europe, and Spain is the country in the world where more sleeping drugs are taken for sleeping purposes. So we do not have balanced time uses, and that's why we say that the time use that we have is not healthy. Now, children and teenagers spend less time playing outside. And this is a recommendation because many parents leave the office very late in the afternoons or evenings. So we basically enroll them to all kinds of after-school activities to try and have work-life balance. Now, in terms of equality, there are many data sources here, just 3. We have time poverty rate of 21% in Spain, which means that people need time to do paid work, care work, and to sleep. And if we account for all of that, people have less than 2 hours every day for themselves. And this is time poverty. And if you check women with children, that goes up to 35%. And you will know that women spend more time on house chores, more than men. So that's quite a gap, and it's a bigger gap than in other EU member states. So another difference there. And the work-life balance capacity and perception in Spain is lower than in the EU, both for men and women. And my last piece of information before I hand it over to Ana Ginés, which is this data about sustainability. In Spain, it takes longer than in other European urban areas to reach your workplace. 31% of Spanish people living in cities take 30 minutes longer to get to their workplace. And the basic services in rural Spain are 16 to 30 kilometers away from their homes. So that's quite a striking difference between urban residents and people who live in the countryside. And finally, democracy and sustainability, democracy and time. If we do not have time for ourselves, well, it's not very likely that we will end up taking part in democracy. And data show that Spanish participation in democracy is below the OECD and the EU, 5% in Spain compared to 12% in Europe. So if we do not have free time, it's not very likely that we will try to participate to improve our democracy. So these data underlie our proposal, and Anna will now focus on the international sphere. Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Yo me tengo que conectar en remoto.
Hi, I'll have to connect online, but hopefully you can hear me okay. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to participate in this, even though I cannot do it in person. But at least I can participate in some fashion, even though it be online. As Marta was saying, I'm going to center my words on ordering sort of working time. And I'll look at, and then my colleagues will say why we need a new organization of working time. What working time does is to structure our lives. For many people, working time is the structure the rest of their time. So if we have an issue, it can be extended, as Marta said, it can be extended to other spheres of our lives. If we analyze how our working time is organized, and I'm looking at aggregated data here, you can see that on one hand, we have working time with excessively long working days. We have very, very long working days. If we look at data from the whole of the EU, we can see that 11% of working people work during their free time, and that 15% work more than what is legally allowed for. Pursuant to the EU directive, it's 48 hours per week. I don't want to dwell on that, because that directive does allow for overtime. But going back to what Marta was saying, despite the fact that the question of ordering working time is an issue which should also be looked at an EU level, in Spain there are specific issues which goes above and beyond that in other countries, our surrounding countries, within the EU or even throughout the world. In the case of Spain, we can see that it is the state of the EU where people finish their working day the latest. More than 30%, or I would say up to 30% of working people work until 7 p.m. 7 p.m. and 10% work even later than 9 p.m. These are unseen. These are data which are features which do not exist in the other EU countries. But not only that, there's a lack of disconnection. It is very difficult for many people to disconnect from work. There are difficult to clearly distinguish what is working time from our own time. And that is true in new forms of working organization. It existed before, but which really came to the fore as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is teleworking. 30% of people who telework have difficulties to completely disconnect, and 60% of them consult their email, their working email, outside working hours. A high percentage, although I include myself, unfortunately, because even though I'm saying what I'm saying, I do have certain vices when it comes to work. And we consult our working email outside of working hours. That is quite a significantly higher percentage of the ones we see in EU countries. The percentage is about 30 to 40%. Here, the percentage is double that, so it's well over 60, 70%. So what are the knock-on effects on the on the labour market and the features of work, these long working hours and this impossibility to disconnect? Marta was pointing at some of the consequences we see in a horizontal fashion, a cross-cutting fashion. But these same consequences can be visualized in the labour market. Number one, this generates issues of safety and health at work. We see there's an increase in physical and psychosocial risks. If we are working excessively, this can lead to an increase of physical risks. And sorry, with the presentation, you should be behind, two behind. Yeah, we're working on that. Say the technicians. It increases physical risks. If we haven't rested and slept enough, there's a danger of lesions, injuries, accidents at work. But not just physical risks, also psychosocial risks. And here we see that stress represents 30% of, if you like, absenteeism. 70% of working people state that they are stressed at work. That's really scary data, but think about it. Because sometimes we use the word stress in a throwaway fashion, not very rigorous or not very scientific, but there is a risk of a psychosocial stress which can lead to disorders, sleeping disorders, physical problems. So this can really badly affect our health. And in Spain, there's a worse perception of an impact of work on the mental health of people. A high percentage of people feel that work is negatively affecting their health. And that is a percentage way beyond the European Union average, about 25%. So it's much higher in Spain. But if we look at the next slide, it's a question of difficulties for life working, if you like, balance, which generates issues at home. There are many people who do need to ask for a reduction in working time to be able to find this ideal work-life balance and be able to look after their family, for instance. In this labor model which we have with very long working days, there are people whose only option to be able to make their working life compatible with their family life is via taking unpaid leave, for instance. This maybe it's not an issue for some people, but if the unequal distribution of care responsibilities still exists in all countries of the world, also in Spain, where we see how the majority of responsibilities of care are the remit of women, this does have a very negative outcome for their professional careers. If you look at part-time contracts, 75% of them are women. People with part-time contracts, 75% are women, repeats the speaker. And if it is true that in part-time way, sometimes involuntary, a person is in a part-time job because they haven't found a full-time job, but it is also true that in many people who do have a part-time job allege that they have it to be able to find this balance and also to deal with their responsibilities for care, for housework, and for the family. Another question: if we look at unpaid leave, 80% of unpaid leave requests are by women, and this will also have a negative impact on their professional endeavor. But it also has an impact on the salary gap, on the wage gap, because this will explain why the salary or the wage gap is so high, both in Spain and in other countries. And last but not least, quite about question of health and equality and finding balance. If we look at the next slide, you can see it will have an impact on productivity, of course. These long days is not positive at all in terms of productivity. Here we find much evidence that working people have less autonomy when it comes to managing their working time. Only 10% in this people in Spain can have full control over managing their working time, compared to 18% in the EU. So it's quite a significant gap. And that is also true in a working time formula such as teleworking, which theoretically should be inspired on flexibility per se, by definition. And what do we see here in this instance? The people who telework, only 16% in Spain have autonomy over the management of their working time, compared to a much higher percentage, well over 25% in the EU. This lack of autonomy in organizing your working time can lead to a hike in difficulties for striking a balance between your work life and the rest of your life. And here we'll have evidence that when there is an increase in the capacity of people to have a bearing on the organization of their working time, if there's a case, it will increase their productivity, their efficiency, their well-being, and a drop in absenteeism from work. So we need to go for a different organization work life, and have big positive knock-on effects. Positive in terms of striking a proper balance, increasing productivity, increasing well-being, and in terms of health as well. Thanks. That's all for me for now. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ana.
Thanks, Anna. Most interesting is first two presentations. I find myself identified with all the stats which we have heard. Okay, now Mariluz, you're going to talk the international perspective of all this. Go ahead. Okay, right. You happy to talk to? Hello, good afternoon. It's fantastic. It's a pleasure to be here. In particular because it's retaking my contact with the Spanish academic world. I spent 33 years, working in the ILO, which has been a magnificent experience. Very particular way of working. I was coordinator as an honest activity of coordinating a working group on working time, and this is going back to the foundation, if you like. And I think this is essential because what we are doing is to go back to the origins of the ILO and its need. We're talking of 103 years since the setting up of the ILO, International Labour Organization, and if we look at the work of 1919 and compare it to the world of 2022, there are many parallels. We don't emerge from a world war, but almost. and we emerge from a big economic change, a social economic change, which in the case of 1919 was a result of the First World War, and which was an explosion, literally, and led to massive changes, societal and cultural changes. And I think we are living through a similar period. Similar convulsions and massive changes, but with a pandemic, with many complications, and with a keen wish to not have to stay glued to the international news. But when we work of working time, there are many sort of cliches. I have no time. Time is golden. Work is health. All these pat phrases. And I remember that my grandma used to say that, and that leads us to this triangle, this key triangle in the conditions of work and what is happening to the people, which is a corresponding work, time, and health. And which is reflected in what the English of 2013 called time sovereignty, your sovereignty over your time, of your working time, which is a concept that goes, which is wider than you might think. It means managing your working time, how I manage it, how I can actually dwell upon that concept. The ILO took it up in 2019, recovering a new vision of working time, which is necessary to look at. Spain has undertaken international commitments when it comes to legislation. For those of us who are jurists, well, we all know that directives have to be, EU and directives have to be applied. There are two directives which have been talked about this morning, which the transposition does involve certain needs and changes in Spanish legislation, and Raquel will refer to them, which I think the Secretary of State said that something is on the table because it's compulsory, but Spain also has obligation in terms of ratification of international conventions, not just EU legislation. And international conventions, the ILO, are mandatory when they are ratified. Well, okay, so there are deadlines for adaptation, a couple of years, but anyway, that's not, we're not talking of that. But Spain has ratified most of the working time convention of the ILO, and there's some, if you like, teething issues or inconsistencies. The convention has to do with working time of the ILO states that, for instance, overtime at night should have minimum 25% more remuneration over and above the working time. And that has not happened in Spain, unfortunately. Why has the ILO kept mum? Well, because the ILO has a review procession of its own convention, which in some cases 1 year, 2 years, or 5-year cycles. And the ILO, in its comments on the different conventions, takes its time. It is a bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape, but it does function. But, of course, so the first justification as to why we need new legislation is obvious. We have to adapt to legal needs, legal requirements undertaken, which are, the Spanish state is committed to, and conventions which were adopted many, many, many years ago, and Spain was in conformity. For some reason, they got lost, if you like, along the road, and we must fulfill them if we don't want the ILO to if you like, to give us pep talks and to sanction us, not with sending troops or fines, but we would not look good. So when it comes to working times, the recent International Labour Conference has included a list of fundamental rights health. And health is only possible when working time is adequate, which allows for rest, relaxation, and well-being. That is essential, and that is done in a tripartite fashion. That is one of the issues which leads us to all these subjects which Marta and Anna have mentioned before. We'll have to have a long, hard look at them again. Spain, and we are told often, have very different time uses, and often we say it's a cultural matter. Let me remind you something that many people didn't know. I have found out when working with this group. The time zones in Spain happened after the Civil War. The only way of doing that was to work until 3 in the afternoon and then until 5 o'clock, working 16 hours a day, doing 2 jobs or more jobs, pluri-employment, and that was needed. And that's why working time has given rise to that. We change our ways of living. Our ways of living, or not living, I should say, or living badly. Right? It is important to go back or to look at this concept of health as the ILO has treated it right from the outset. Let me share a few thoughts with you. Since 1919, we are talking of 40-hour working week, and we still talk of 40 hours working week. Why? Because most of the countries, and the ILO has more than 200 member states, that 40 hours a week is a utopia, is pie in the sky. Many of the people have an average of 47, 48 working hours per week. And so there's a big, massive difference within Europe. I'm not talking of the public sector, right? But there is an excess of working hours which will affect the most precarious sectors. If we wish to talk of decent work, we should enter in this concept of work, reanalyze the concept which led up to all these conventions. And why not? And this is not dependent on me, because ILO is an UN agency which is tripartite. So we should press for that to happen in the international sphere. We have to say, what does rest and relaxation mean? The ILO has been very clear about that. And I think in some other legal modifications, there are some difficulties when it comes to ILO conventions, but especially in certain contracts. So this would require an adaptation. But what do we understand by rest? What do we understand by balance? There's a Convention 156 on family responsibility, which is very advanced for its time. We're talking, and of course, to carry out to prove a convention takes its time. But equality is paramount. So all different types of contract should ensure equity and equality, because equality is one of the cross-cutting rights, and which we do need equity in the workplace. Furthermore, working time uses, and the ILO includes that in all its conventions, do include flexibility or adaptability, if we don't wish to use words which for some of us could be bothersome. And this flexibility will allow productivity. This morning we were saying that productivity was one of the key issues when we talked of working time. But it's very clear that to have better well-being, feeling better, will lead us to that end. And there are many studies of the ILO which lead that. To conclude, this triangle, this golden triangle, health, work, and working time, or time, let's call it time, is borne out clearly in figures relative to the effects of time. There are a series of chronobiological studies show that when you've passed the age of 50, the possibility of having cancer in night workers hikes up to the tune of 20 or 30%. That's to do with mental health, stress, and so on and so forth. So here are the 3 questions interlinked. If we look at that at night time, which is painful, difficulty, what we must think is, well, perhaps we should regulate to avoid this perverse effect. Cultural changes and change of perception are possible. And let me give you an example here. And I go back to nighttime working, because it's very specific. At the beginning, when the ILO was set up, women and children were barred from nighttime work because they are weaker, so they were so-called protected in inverted commas. 50 years, this protection was suspended, saying that women could also work at night. Why not? At that time, it was an egalitarian rule, but deep down, is what was needed, so it said. But now we have to absolutely limit nighttime working because of health reasons. Can it take 20, 30, 40 years? I hope not. But things need to move and need to move, if you like, decisively. So we do have to find a response to the Committee on the Future of Work. And if we look at and if we want healthy reasons, conditions at work, we do need that, and we should have that autonomy and sovereignty on our time. It's essential. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Mariluz.
Thank you very much, Mariluz. And with that, we bring the first part to an end. And I think that we're all now convinced that we need reform. So moving on to the second part of this afternoon, we will now discuss proposals, considerations. We will start with Labour. Raquel, I hand it over to you.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we have now some time to share the proposals. Well, they are not proposals because these group of people who work on labor law in universities, but not only, we are sharing reflections, we are brainstorming. So these are ongoing proposals, and we are asking for your participation and your contribution. So we have about 30 to 40 minutes. I'll try to be brief, but I will start by telling you about the methodology behind these proposals. The way we have approached this working time organization to meet all the goals. Well, precisely by setting goals, because we want the time use law in labor matters and specifically working time organization. Well, we wanted to meet a series of objectives, and we have broken that down into areas, action points and objectives. Number one is predictability. We want a predictable working time, because only if workers know how much they will have to work, but not only that, but also the distribution of those working hours, well, by knowing that, they'll be able to organize their private life. So that's indispensable. We cannot talk about private life and working time use management unless we know beforehand at what point we will be asked to work. And to meet this objective, there are different actions that can be taken. We have identified 3 that are essential in our opinion. The first one would be to reinforce. Oh, sorry. It's the right slide. Sorry, I was not paying attention to the screen. So, number 1, the first action to be taken would be to strengthen the mandatory duty of businesses to inform their employees about their working hours, especially those businesses or organizations that work with changing shifts or variable working times. So we believe that employees should be informed in writing about the flexible working hours, the shifts, and not only that, but which would be the time slots, which are the criteria that are used in that business to distribute working hours or working shifts. So the business, the organization should inform about how much and when. So working hours and days. And also notices, because there are companies that sometimes need to implement specific shifts or changing working hours, but we need to be informed beforehand to be able to organize our private life. And in terms of the digitization of the economy and the new jobs on digital platforms, we would have to regulate unforeseeable working days. You could think that when you work for an online platform, you cannot be sure about when you will be working. Well, that's far from true. And obviously, your working time will be a bit more vague than in a formal labor relationship with a company, but there can be predictability. For example, companies can guarantee a minimum of working hours and they can commit to that, or you can set a specific working hours or time slots, specific days of the week that people will have to be available throughout the week, or cancellation periods when it comes to working hours. So in digital labor, we can also implement labor predictability. You just have to have the will. And another important matter is the working schedule. In the workers' statute, this is a document that is drafted by companies, but of course we need to try and get all stakeholders involved. So when it comes to drafting the schedule, where there should be the engagement of employees, and workers should be able to influence the drafting of working hours, shifts. So the individual experience of workers and preferences, because of course your preferences change over time, well, they should be taken into account when it comes to distributing working hours. Secondly, we want the working time organization to be rational. What does it mean? Well, this can be done in different manners. There are two main elements to increase the rational character of working time organization. Obviously, all workers aspire to work less. And when we talk about working time reduction, it's not only about reducing our daily work, but also overtime. And this is something that has been brought up by the State Secretary in the morning. So it's not only the standard working day, but also overtime. And the main question here, so which would be the ideal quantity, 30 hours, 32, 35 a week? Well, it's still open as a discussion, as you will fully understand, but we do have food for thought. There are elements that make us think that, yes, we should aspire to a working time reduction because that's taking place in the collective bargaining. Daniel Redondo will mention this, but this is a historical trend in collective bargaining in Spain. The working time average is at 38.5 hours a week. So that's already being implemented. And the same goes for the public administration. Civil servants work less than workers of the private sector. And if we check the EU stats, well, the average is at 38.8 hours every week. And as I said, we should also regulate overtime. I will not discuss it here because I'm not fully knowledgeable about it, but in France, they have these cap by law 35 hours a week, but then through overtime, they go up to 48 hours a week. So we think but this is a very interesting discussion. So let's not only focus on working time reduction and then allow the working time to be expanded through overtime or special working time. In Spain, we have a special regulation for special working time. So, on the other hand, how can we rationalize working time? And this has been brought up once and again in the morning, and that is by condensing the working day. So, to try and stop interruptions. And for those interruptions not to be too long, Marta mentioned that in Spain, in the typical working day, we spend 2 hours for lunch or even more. So this is the crux of the issue here, and this is in red on my slide. Is it more rational to just have a break in our working day, and it should be a 30-minute to 1 hour break? But there are workers that tell you, well, this doesn't help me with my work-life balance because I use my lunch break or that interruption in the middle of the day to go pick up my children at school, to have lunch with them. So to what extent is that better? So sometimes rationality goes against the preferences of some people. And in small cities, for example, it's very frequent for shops to be closed during midday time and during the lunch break. So what's better? To be more rational, to be home earlier, but to, of course, skip those 2 hours or that 2 hour break in the afternoon. So, of course, that's food for thought and we'll have to take it into account. Thirdly, working time has been discussed here in the panel. Mariluz mentioned it, and of course, the working time organizations has to be a healthy one, and we can take several actions here or areas in which we can take measures. There are 4 that we prioritize. Firstly, we should expand the weekly rest. It's 1.5 days in Spain. It's true that there are exceptions to that, but we should have a 2-day weekly rest. And this is not reinventing the wheel. In our Spanish collective bargaining, there are examples, and in many organizations beyond the collective bargaining, well, if we're talking about office work, well, people work 5 days a week and therefore have a 2-day rest every week. So if these became law, it would be beneficial for sectors that work 6-day weeks. And these would probably benefit activity sectors and specific professions that are more precarious. So we would conquer the 2-day rest. And I think that we should be able to accumulate rest days, but a new discussion opens up here, and it hasn't been solved. The law in the Common Working Time Organization allows to accumulate rest time in periods of 14 weeks. So you can work for 11 days and then accumulate rest days. So 11 working days and 3 days to rest. So a heated discussion that we've had to do with the definition and of 1 day rest every week. In these 14-day periods, you would be able to accumulate your days, your rest days, but you have to do a 1-day rest every week. But we go back to the same problem, but from a different lens. It looks healthier, but from a work-life balance standpoint, is it better? Some workers say, no, I'd rather accumulate my rest days because what I'm interested in is in working for 14 days and then be able to have some time with the family. So it's very difficult to regulate work. And that's why, as a task force, we want to focus on collective bargaining, because it's very difficult to regulate these matters through lawmaking. So probably working day interruptions makes more sense, or rest day accumulation. This makes more sense through collective bargaining because it will reflect the actual reality of activity sectors and companies, and the law is probably not the best way to do it. Secondly, we need to tackle digital disconnect. Ana Ginés mentioned it before. We need to disconnect. In Spain, we do have a digital disconnection regulation in the organic law that protects personal time. This is from 2018. And it's quite interesting that that regulation that is enshrined in a data protection law could be approached from a labor standpoint. So that's the main idea, to grab this disconnection obligation and bring it to the working time regulation and focus on it as a right of workers. And of course, it means it is an obligation for companies. And companies and businesses should train and educate workers about digital fatigue or IT fatigue. Now, thirdly, shift work. This was mentioned in the morning, and let me tell you, night work and shift work are the groups of workers that face the hardest problems when it comes to work-life balance. Many of the measures that you can implement to workers at large in the case of night work and shift work, that's much more complicated. For example, labor flexibility. How do you implement smart work or flexible work in such a category of workers? So you have to be much more creative to be able to propose a meaningful reform for night workers and shift workers. In terms of shift work, well, the task force focuses on the need to have a greater engagement by workers so that they can influence the decisions and they can express their individual preferences to the business, to the employer. That's key for us workers to have more influence from a health standpoint and regarding the psychological and social risks. We need to have the possibility to influence. And this can be done because there are mathematical algorithms that can help us greatly with that. There are IT software in terms of shift organization that can take into account individual preferences, and the software can tell us which is the best way to organize shifts. Because I know that this has to do with healthy working conditions and social and psychological risks. So our ability to influence the decision making by our employers. And night work. It's not only that night work is more precarious, there is evidence that night workers for a long time in their career, well, it's a risk factor for cancer, and they find it very hard to strike a work-life balance. There are several proposals along these lines, and I don't want to bore you down, and we don't have much time, but let me share with you a couple of ideas that we could start considering. The first one would be to put a cap on the number of nights that can be worked by this group. So maybe 5 consecutive nights with 2-day rest. That makes sense. But not only that, we need to guarantee that night workers can have a 30-minute break between 2 and 4 a.m. because in terms of from a chronobiology standpoint, there's evidence that says that if you have a break at that time, you can better adapt to the circadian rhythms. So they need a 30-minute break and a light breakfast. And then the possibility for night workers to be able to work days as of 50 years of age. There are many other possibilities, but we thought that these two were of special interest. Now, the fourth objective. The working time organization or regulation has to be sustainable. And when we say sustainability, I don't know if sustainability is the right word or balance. We need a balanced working time regulation. What do we mean by that? Well, of course, organizations, businesses must be flexible. The company must have some room to flexibly organize human resources because, of course, organizations must be productive. But we need to strike a balance so that the interests of workers are taken into account in a sustainable working time use regulation. From the standpoint of life and care. So, for example, the organization or regulation of the working day, for example, for companies to say that on a given week you will work more than 40 hours and you can offset that overtime at a different moment, well, that's great, but the offsetting should benefit workers, and there are several possibilities for that. For example, that special working day should not be applicable to, for example, partial time workers or people who have a reduced working day or because they are taking care of children or people on leave, etc., unless those people want to implement this special working day. This is not we've seen this in collective bargaining. We didn't come up with this as the task force. There are some collective bargainings in Spain that have been focusing on this special working day, all for workers to be able to influence the decision of the company when it comes to offsetting that overtime or special working day. So increased participation or more offsetting schemes for workers in terms of special working weeks or days. Partial time work. Part-time work sometimes is voluntary. Part of the workers who work part-time, they do it for work-life balance purposes, but many workers work part-time because they do not have any other choice. So it's not their own free choice, and that has a high impact on women in with sticky floors, as we call them. In some organizations, part-time work is used by companies as a factor to do flexible work time. And, well, theoretically, on paper, that's not bad. But we believe that the current regulation means that we have a not very predictable working time for part-time workers and with a huge gender bias. Currently, in part-time contracts, well, basically, companies and workers agree on the working week or the working day, but then you can add additional hours overtime, and this is basically for the company's interest, because if the company is interested, well, the company will ask the worker to work longer. But if the company doesn't need overtime, well, this will never happen, and that sounds fine, but it has to be regulated because the possibility and the percentage of overtime is very high, and that means that there is no predictability for workers, because the part-time worker wonders how long she or he will end up working. a part-time work can go up to 38 hours a week, but that's not predictable. So our proposals want to regulate to the extent possible overtime in part-time contracts to improve predictability and, of course, offsetting schemes for that overtime. Thirdly, another action would be to take into account the needs of workers when it comes to the right to education or training. There are several schemes in other countries, for example, a leave for training purposes, and for workers who are in training, that their working time can be adapted to strike a balance. The fifth objective that should be met by this working time regulation, well, working time should guarantee equality, work-life balance, and co-responsibility. And, well, there are very interesting measures that can be adopted here, but there are two elements for the analysis and reflection, what we call presence and absence rights in this sphere of co-responsibility and work-life balance. We would like to promote rights for flexible working time organization. So these are presence rights and not so much absence rights, because generally speaking, absence rights mean less less payment, less salary. So this is a bit, well, the background information for these considerations. And to try and improve that, because we believe that the current regulation of working time, that is Article 34.8 of the current law, of the current regulation, it's quite interesting for workers and it aims to improve the work-life balance. But of course, everything can be improved. Also, the right to adapt working time in this Article 34.8, so that workers will be more autonomous and be able to express their needs for work-life balance.
So basically, right to adapting the working day is interesting. In particular, that working people could individualize their working times, perhaps using, if you like, a series of compensation of hours in different working weeks. So flexibility, adapting that, right? So if one had this irregular distribution be the interest of the company, as I said before, they should it is also important that there should also be another possibility, that working people should be able to aspire to an irregular distribution in their own benefit and for co-responsibility and work-life balance. And when it comes to cutting back working hours, there's also scope for improvement. In what sense? Well, it would be good that the reduction of the working day to look after children or having to take care of dependent adults could be a working day reduction, which could be exercised in a non-continuous fashion. Because sometimes people's needs, when it comes to finding a balance, are different. I'm thinking of couples who are divorced, and I have joint custody of my kids, and one week I would like to cut my day because I have to look after my kids, but the following week that should not be the case. So why should a reduction of working time be so inflexible and rigid? And then there's also the question of widening paid leave. Paid leave, well, that's a long, thorny debate. We would like to highlight what are the needs and ask, I'd like to ask you, well, to ponder and reflect on widening these remunerated leave, either say for leave for medical visits or looking after dependent adults or family emergencies, if you like. All this debate is something which has as a backdrop the question of foreseeability in working time, co-responsibility, and all that has a backdrop these community directives, which go back to 2019, in terms of life-work balance, working conditions which are transparent and foreseeable. And it is clear that this debate has to be framed in the fulfillment of these community directives. There's no time now to open up a debate on how Spain should adapt to these new requirements of the directives on transparent and foreseeable working times and on life-work balance. But these minimum rights in these community legal instruments should have to be complied with. Let me talk about the last aspect, is to gain democracy in terms of organizing the working time. That has to be done. I thought well, don't worry, I'm coming to an end. The working time has to be more democratic. How are we going to achieve that? Well, logically, ensuring there's more participation, attempting to cater for individual wishes, but also giving greater participation to social partners, to organizations who represent the interests of working people, so trade unions and works councils, and also taking the business organizations. How? Well, the law of, or the statute of the working people should ensure that collective negotiation, collective bargaining should also include working time use. The current regulation between men and women establishes that a collective agreement must negotiate in terms of equality. The same, we would like to propose that we should negotiate on how to organize working time better, taking into account all these coordinates. And we had looked at the possibility of establishing the mandatory nature for companies to draw up a working time use plans. But we are also aware of the difficulty. We add another element, another layer of difficulty to corporate management. So we have plans, you have sort of a health risk at work plans, prevention plans, and so on. How do we manage the fragmentation of all these instruments and tools and these obligations to draw up plans and protocols? That is why we thought that an alternative could be, instead of creating a specific plan for time usage, modify the current rules in terms of equality and prevention of health and safety at work risks, and look at time. And that and the use of time affects equality, the gender parity, and working conditions which are healthy. So it is true that we don't yet clear on our own minds of the ideas, more plans, or shall we just do it in a different way, but with the compulsion to ensure that enterprises should bear in mind working time use. And yet, as right at the end, this is a concern of the working group, work has context, and working life has a context, but we have not. But unfortunately, we had to continue reflecting, and this morning we were talking of the self-employed. That's a huge melon to open, and we are saying no. We are talking strictly of salaried workers and. But we must talk of the self-employed and time use management. We should also ponder on how we organize the working time in certain sectors and activities with special working times, because all the reflections we have carried out think of the general regime of working time, general schemes applied on the whole to work. Right? But it so happens that there are specific rules on special working days, special working times. And there are many activities where these general rules in the Statute of Workers are going to have exceptions. And there are certain sectors where different working times are catered for, and different form of working regulation which does not exactly fit those parameters of sustainability and balance. And forget about we can't forget about special working rules, where there are also particular cases. In the case of domestic staff, domestic workers, there we also have to take on board, especially when it comes to care. Let's leave it there. In any case, hopefully there will be an occasion to open up a discussion and a debate. Thank you.
Muchas
Thanks ever so much, Raquel. Interesting proposals. We do know towards where we want to go. And now we shall hear the trends in collective agreements. So go forward. Hello, good afternoon. I would like to talk to you about the regulation of collective bargaining to date, and looking in particular at working times. Let me establish nuances that we have decided to look at the subject we're going to present and the aspects within these matters which will be dealt with. So it's a consideration must be borne in mind. If we look at my following considerations, have to do with the last 2 years, which can offer a perspective which is quite clear. I should mention that this question has been looked at in previous studies organized by the National Convention and Collective Agreements, coordinated by Professor Alfonso Millado, Professor Quintanilla Navarro, and Professor Gil Plana, who's also carried out a study in that respect. I shall start looking at the longest agreed working time in collective agreements, which tends to reduce that in a 2-year time span. In 2022, according to the collective agreement in June this year, the longest day was 1,740 odd hours in total. These data means it's slightly shorter than in 2020 or 2021, and yet there are data which are much better than in previous years, such in 2019 or 2014. If we look at specific areas, such as sectorial negotiating agreements, well, there are maximum hours very similar, 1,710 hours, which is on average quite reduced. If we look at the sectorial area, it's a bit larger. It approaches the general tendency, which is 1,722 hours. Now, if we look at the weekly, we're talking of 38.5 hours and 39 hours per week. If we look at the business world, it's 38.5, and in areas of sub-entrepreneurial collective agreements, it's about 39. But we should mention that collective agreements which do have figures below 38, for instance, 37.5 hours. I shall now look at the work now, which has been mentioned before, and the collective negotiation, in a sense, will adjust limitations. On one hand, recurrent question which you can find in collective agreement is the percentage that the irregular availability of hours which the entrepreneur can use. There are collective agreements foresee an amount lower than what is legal, 10%, or others increase it up to 28%. Figure which is considerable. It is true, on the other hand, that we should mention that collective agreements tend to establish requirements in terms of limitation to the regular distribution of the, for instance, certain agreements say that this irregular distribution are dependent on the employer justifying the irregular distribution of the working day. Then there also like prior warning, which are necessary, and also our banks. And then there are also certain differences. There are collective agreements which have our banks, which the employer can use whenever needed. For instance, 88 and 120 hours per annum. The use of this time has the same requirements as the regular distribution of the working day. Justification necessary, and sometimes there has to be a preview, a prior notice. We attempt to limit the use of this figure, but doesn't eliminate it altogether. There are other measures containing flexibility, more aimed at the workers, we should say, but which are quite common, which are flexible times, which are have different forms. Floating hours, whereby there is a certain leeway for entering and starting your working day and finishing it. They're more like flexi time. And then there are one part which is central, which is the central block, and where there's flexibility in terms of end time. And then something else in collective negotiations is overtime hours. In that case, it is quite surprising that collective agreement or collective negotiation, collective bargaining, tends to try and cut back the existence of these overtime hours. In some agreements, we limit completely the carrying out of overtime hours. In other cases, those which are known as habitual are limited, or are the only ones allowed. In other cases, there is no overtime can be carried out at night, or certain people who already enjoy a reduction of working time. And often we tend to limit the use of overtime hours, urging the idea of a separate employment post when we go beyond a certain threshold of overtime hours. On the other hand, there are certain necessary requirements, justification. You have to, certain agreements say that to use overtime hours, this must be justified prior to the need, saying, well, the whys and the wherefores. And in other, there are the more restricted instances where there has to be a prior authorization. It is quite surprising. Also, right notice is also established, stating 24 hours beforehand. Another matter is quite interesting, rest time. The trend is also to reduce or increase the number of minutes or time. So within the day, it can be equal to 20 to 30 minutes. In other cases, not considered as rest, we introduce a pause associated to visualization screens, which is notable, especially in contact centers. You can see these kind of regulations. And then in rest between days, there'll be 13 or 15 days. And what about the weekly rest or weekly rest? There are 2 days rest and during a week, or in the cases where Raquel has mentioned, where you allow the accumulation of rest, adding it up, but there's 1 day should be taken during the week. You can accumulate another day of rest, and the day that is fixed for weekly rest has to be a Sunday. Another point in collective bargaining as digital disconnection, and many agreements refer to the law, others qualify it. We are moving forward now because many agreements do actually go into specific details concerning the right to digital disconnection. Apparently, the measures are drawn up in a relative fashion, such as a recommendation, such as should, or which can be a problem. And all these measures, in many instances, are seen only from the workers' viewpoint. Other areas in collective agreement, other interesting subjects are the shift work, which has been mentioned, and we look at the for how foreseeable it is, establishing calendars where we limit clearly when the shifts will be carried out, shift rotation or the turnover of shifts, which can be 3 months in certain cases, and so on. There's much reference made to these shifts, and there's a communication to the representative of the workers, this organization. Another subject would be partial, part-time working, and collective bargaining. It looked at the complementary hours, and looking at the maximum percentage of overtime work which can be carried out. This percentage was 30 and 60%, and prior warning for agreed overtime hours. It can be a wide range, 24 hours notice or even 15 days in certain agreements. To conclude, I'll look at the unpaid leave and paid leave, and we look at both elements. For instance, when it comes to unpaid leave, we have long-term unpaid leave. We have found unpaid leave for training is linked to the post, where we do require a certain minimum seniority and not much more. But these examples are being introduced, and when it comes to paid leave, there can be certain situations as paid leave to get married, or the marriage allowance is foreseen also for unmarried couples, and these are some of and they're the reasons. Unfortunately, for reasons of time, I cannot go into all the details there. Thanks all.
Muchas gracias, Daniel. Bueno, con esto cerramos.
Well, I think we close the second block and now we're to the third and last, or the penultimate one. As not everything is work, and Marta will talk to us about regulating time use outside the. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
We will be really keen to listen to you, and then we'll perhaps dwell upon some of the questions in the field. When we talk of cross-cutting proposals, as we said before looking at the PowerPoint, perhaps a brief introduction. As I said before, time is a puzzle. Time has, like a jigsaw puzzle, organization time of working time is essential, but it has to be consistent with other times of how we organize our lives and how we organize our societies. To make these proposals, which you're going to put forth now, these proposals go back in time. What do I mean by that? That either we have based ourselves on what had been or proposals by the Turco law in France in 2000 or the French law and also in 2000. We have heard from both of them this morning, and we are based on the initiative for the reform of time of working times. That commission was there until 2018, and the methodology was to propose changes in different aspects, in different sectors. And to do that, it shouldn't just be the scientists who reflected, but no, we wish to have multi-stakeholder processes, whether it be scientists, businesses, citizens, and other stakeholders. And we'd look what could be done in each of the economic sectors with this experience and other good practices which we have heard from the panel of experts. We are working some of the objectives in mind. Now, let me tell you about 8 areas we believe are important to look at these measures to attempt to achieve more balanced uses of time. The first one is governance. This is a good practice, and that is borne out by French and Italian examples. Time policies should have a cross-cutting approach, and therefore it is important to ensure that the government should set up mechanisms and necessary infrastructures to be able to carry out a follow-up of these cross-cutting measures. Both in Italy and in France, they have tools such as time use offices. They are offices which are responsible for having a global, holistic view of how these time use policies are implemented or thrashed out, if you like. In Catalonia, there is a methodology which is working well. Yesterday, there was a workshop on that. Time pacts, a tool to with a view to reaching agreements. What we would suggest is that if there was a time use law, there should be an office concerning time use policies from the chair and social consultation panels to be able to ensure there's a constant communication and conversation going with the social stakeholders, social partners. Something else. Now, let's look at people who have elected officials or people in management roles. We talk of humanizing timetables of the political agenda. Some of the proposals implemented in other countries and other regions are to bring forward these timetables, which end up very, very late. Even sort of public speaking events or sessions of the Senate, of the Congress, municipal or council meetings, to bring them forth a bit, not have them so late, so that even people who have managing roles in public administration or those who are elected officials who represent the law should also be able to have a life. After all that, it is important in public service, and this is also something that the French are good at, and I see that there are officials from councillors from Strasbourg and other cities in France. When you talk about time use policies, hey, they say, you've got to keep outside measures for citizenship, but also measures which you have to apply internally. In that sense, this year, Barcelona is the world capital in time uses, and we're working on those lines. And some of the practices we are proposing, quite apart from matters related to digitalization, well, also would need many data on waiting times. How long does it wait before we get an official answer from a public administration? And the other one is public hiring. Public hiring should ensure that the clauses say that the persons who are working that do that with decent working times use. These are the two of the axes. The other ones, the two main columns, if you like, the two others, and the third one, I'll talk about research. And there are many people here who are familiar with that, and many of them who have been researching. Yesterday, the Euro MP from the Socialist Party, Lina Galvez, who said that we need data, data, and data. Time use surveys in Spain is going every 10 years, and now we have been 12 years without a time use survey. Without surveys, without hard facts and hard statistics, it's very difficult to take measures. And if you don't know how to what we dedicate our time, we won't be able to improve. That is why what we are suggesting as a target is to increase the frequency of data pickup on time uses, or data on time uses. Also, splitting it up between remunerated work and non-remunerated work. Also looking at time uses in Spain, and to be able to foster and encourage them in a practical manner. Not just research, but it should be related to time use policies. And the last criteria, and this has already happened in policy of equality, to promote the evaluation of public policies looking at the impact in time uses, because otherwise we'll be taking public decisions, but we won't have any metrics to decide if we're improving or not. Another key aspect, and then we'll go on to the fourth axis, which is education. Education and lifelong learning. In that sense, for us, the objective is to improve, if you like, educational outcomes in Spain. Spain is one of the, or Catalonia, so Spain is one of the European regions where we spend more time in the classroom. And yet the results, as you well know, are not particularly good. They're certainly not the best in Europe. So we ask ourselves, well, if we look at chronobiology and health, we should take them on board when we decide contact hours for teenagers. There's a late school saying that teenagers shouldn't start before 9:30 in the morning, because as we saw the other day, chronobiologists have spoken, said teenagers, if you go any earlier, well, you'll be lousy because they're half asleep. The other important point in that is to ensure free time in childhood. Ensure that they spend enough time outside, outdoors, and the survey of childhood in Barcelona will say, what is their main issue? To people or to kids in Barcelona, the answer is time. Time. They want more free time, more time with their families. So that is one of the priorities we must look at. Fifth and sixth axis, mobility. We have talked a lot about that yesterday in a panel explaining good practices in mobility and in time. There's one key issue which should help us, which is energy saving. They are closely linked and go hand in hand. And in that sense, we would also like to guarantee the right to time to people who live in urban areas and in rural areas throughout the country. A right to time use which is egalitarian in nature in the whole country. And related to mobility and sustainability, it is true that I'd like to explain to you that there are experts here who could do much better than me the direct relationship between the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and time use policies. There are 9 SDGs which have a direct bearing on time use policies, and if you are undertaking to meet the 2030 agenda, you also undertake to respect the time use policy. Trade and consumption and consumers policy. We've also looked at that. 10% of the Spanish population who are working at 9 p.m. are still working. And that's not talking about nighttime working. I'm talking about people who have a day job. I'm looking at people who come from other areas of Europe saying, well, what the hell's going on in your country? Yeah, it's an issue we have here, and we really have to deal with that. And the main target is to rationalize timetables in trade, compact them, attempt to move forward the time when people who work in trade, right, who work in trade, could be able to finish earlier. And we talk about responsible consumer policy. Of course, all of us like to have a little grocer store or supermarket open till really late. That's fine. But there are people working there. Another important point, and Matthew Walker has referred to that this morning, visual supply, visual. Spain, the TV prime time slot is the latest in the whole of the EU. That is why the proposal is clear here. To have a pact, a statewide pact, to ensure that we adapt the prime time TV slot to what happened in the rest of Europe. If that is possible, it's all a jigsaw puzzle. Everything has, but it is a step, and it will be a significant one, and would allow us to make aware why this is necessary. Related to that, we know that not having is TV, screens, series are increasingly important, and therefore one of the targets should be that we should look at preventive policy of prevention for screen addiction among the most vulnerable groups such as minors and teenagers. There are different proposals from European countries which we are studying to see what could be done. And to conclude, we believe that a key area, and it has been in Spain and other European countries, the role of municipalities. The Italian law and the French law we've seen is more
Cómo los planes de organización
plans, such as the equality law in 2007, recognized that cities, municipalities, should have time use plan. That's a recommendation. We're looking at the possibility of not just making it a recommendation, but go a bit further. Be a bit more robust and say that the largest municipalities should necessarily have a time use policy in their municipality. It should be mandatory. Many things which could come into that, and transport and so on. I think we've come to the end of the presentation, and before handing you the floor, let us explain 9 reasons which justify the opportunity of approving this law. The law is a historical opportunity to guarantee the right to time use to all citizens and to ensure a healthier and happier and more balanced life. It will improve the problem with time use, it affects a majority, not a minority. I was speaking with some colleagues from Argentina. We're talking of happiness. This will produce more happiness, also important in the times we're living through. So that we'll be more happy. Third point, young people. We find that young people are the allies in climate change, but when we talk of time use policies, they're the ones who are saying, hey, stuff these timetables. We need, it's a battle which affects all of us, but in particular, it's a battle being fought by young people in our country, and it's a battle for the new generations. All my colleagues have said that. It's key for business productivity and for talent retention. Talent wants better conditions. It will contribute to energy saving. We're finding answers to our the constant energy emergency. We were able to close off all lights because we've gone home earlier. That will certainly cut down our carbon footprint and will contribute to everyone's happiness. It will facilitate life-work balance and co-responsibility. We'll explain why it improves physical and emotional health and will help us sleep better. I'll ask you, because not everyone is going to see that, how many people have sleeping issues, have sleeping disorders? Well, these policies will help us to dream and to sleep. And to conclude, strengthen democracy, very important. If we see the step forwards being taken by the extreme right, if we don't have time for us, we won't have time to participate and create a better society jointly. And it is the basis for new public policies, new rights, and hopefully we will have all the people who are following us online and those of you here in the room to be able to continue reflecting jointly. Thanks ever so much.
Bueno, con esto cerramos, digamos, las ponencias.
With this, we close this session. Thank you very much to the 4 panelists. Very interesting remarks. And, well, over to you. As we said at the beginning, these are just proposals and considerations that we are discussing and reflecting about. So you can make your remarks now. You can go, I would ask you to go straight to the point, because sometimes we rumble a little bit. I should have said, well, in Raquel's presentation, well, she mentioned things that are still pending. How do we achieve a better work-life balance with a compact working day or with a long lunch break? Should it be mandatory to have a 1-day weekly rest? What about paid or unpaid leave? Should companies have a specific working time regulation, or does it make time regulation or work regulation too complex? These are the ones I jotted down, and well, whatever you want to mention. We have quite a lot of time. What time is it? Yeah, we have about 40 minutes for discussion. So let's gather the questions first, and then we will respond. Okay. Shall I go first? Yes. Well, I want to congratulate you all on the initiative. And with Marta, we have been discussing for some months. I have made my conceptual contributions, which is my field of expertise. And it's a huge opportunity. And I would add to that the possibility to go beyond the official notion of time, because we are very much focused on calendars, clocks, like metering our lives, and it's working time, my time, other people's time, and we can go beyond that. And well, it's about measuring our life, because otherwise it's very machine-like, basically constantly measuring our lives in hours. So let's be open to different time notions, and there's no consideration of the future. It's true that this aims to open up future perspectives, but governments will have the need to think about the future and plan for it, because even if we change regulations today, well, we're not foreseeing the future organization of work. So that's my contribution, and my congratulations once again on the work that you have done. Thank you. Good afternoon, Eduardo Rojo, Autonomous University of Barcelona. I want to congratulate you all as panelists, and I want to share some reflections, legal and social reflections. My first one is a hands-on example. Some years ago, I was chairing over a collective bargaining of an important company with very good salary conditions, and it went bust. It doesn't exist anymore. they were about to sign, and we came to 2:30 p.m. and the meeting was interrupted for lunch. And the lunch break lasted for 1 hour and 25 minutes, and then we followed the meeting until midnight. So even in the cracks of the collective bargaining, and Mariluz knows perfectly what I'm talking about, you can have examples. And after the Second World War, we used to have lunch at midday. So working time restructuring meant social restructuring. Now, legal considerations. This has been perfectly mentioned by all of you. The international conventions and the ILO directives. And my dear friend Joaquino Perez Rey, I'm sure that he has said that it's in the parliamentary process. I think that it will be easy to pass a law without a financial cost than one with a financial cost for companies, which is the work-life balance one. I might be wrong, but in my experience, whatever has a financial cost ends up being to no avail. And I'd like to be wrong, but about the interesting proposals made by Raquel, I think that, and I'm sure that you have done this, you have to take into account the case law by the European Union courts, because there's a lot of knowledge and expertise there. And I felt concern at some point, not because of your presentation, but, well, at the end I had peace of mind. But I thought, well, we have to reach the end of your presentation to talk about collective bargaining. But you haven't mentioned the unions or the union organizations. Well, the negotiation of working times is done through collective bargaining. It's been mentioned by Danielle. And then you can organize the flexibility, individualization measures, but of course everything goes through collective bargaining and the engagement of strong stakeholders representing the labor world. Otherwise the proposals are watered down. It's a fundamental idea that I have been defending for a long time. And let me wrap up so that others can take the floor. As Marta said, this potential law will help make a change. But of course, then the implementation, the compliance with the law is a different story. And Mariluz knows that about ILO conventions. We need a cultural change. Let me give you an example. The labor reform of 2021 has meant a key cultural change, because we now talk about stability and not temporality, with all kinds of pros and cons, but we have changed our mindset, because in the past they asked you, oh, do we have to go for, I mean, some years ago they would ask you, I just want the contract that is cheapest for me. I think that we have changed that mindset. And I just want to stir the discussion here and congratulate you. When I leave my classes, obviously my students pose questions to me. And when I talk about working time, they say to me, look, Professor, this is not implemented over time, payment. And I always say, look, that's the regulation, but the implementation is patchy. And sometimes I don't feel very proud about my explanation, because they politely ask thorny questions to me, because according to the ILO, I am a person of advanced age. Congratulations to you all.
And I'm an elected people, and before I was a sociologist. but I'm not an expert of this question. But it was very rich, so thank you for that. And I think I will think about that even during the weekend on my family time. So, but I would like to have a question for Professor Serrano. You explain a lot of things, but I don't know. I think there is perhaps some paradox between the goals you develop. For instance, as I know, but perhaps I'm wrong, the cognitivist scientists show us that it is necessary to have pauses to be to have a best concentration and vigilance level. And so in the same time you speak about the idea of compact the day of the work. Is it possible to do the both together? I don't know. And as the person said before, you explain how to develop the flexibility of work based on the needs of the worker. But we need also, in the same time, I think, a certain collective spirit, corporate spirit, yes, to maintain and to develop the trade union organization. So who are very important also to defend the question of the rights. So yes, I have, that is my question, and sorry for my English, it's a little bit bad.
Gracias.
Going to page. La primera pregunta. Ok, no.
Sí, hola.
Hello, I'd like to congratulate you. I think it's a broad reflection that will lay the foundations for an impactful law in the working conditions and quality of life of people. I just want to make a couple of contributions. Firstly, I work at Barcelona Activa, that belongs to the Barcelona City Council, and for over 15 years we've been working with companies in new working time regulations or organizations in companies, in businesses. And the impact of the pandemic has been an accelerator of changes and transformations that had only started in very innovative companies but were absent in others. But while discussing with the involved companies, well, there has been a change in the work culture at large. We are advancing towards new models. These space-time flexibility was only used in specific cases before, and this has become mainstream, and we are headed towards a hybrid working model. And maybe in this reflection, I'm not sure if it is foreseen that not only a bunch of people, but everyone will be working remotely in nearly all professions and workplaces, and whoever cannot work well, we will discuss this later in a panel to see if that entails higher inequality in companies between those that can do home office and have specific flexibility and other workers that will not be able to do that. So it's quite an important element, and it should be taken into account, because these reflections that we are sharing here go along the lines of history, but the revolution is taking place very fast, and maybe that should be included in the analysis. Now, I believe that the role of municipalities is key. It's enshrined in Italian and French law. We don't have it in our law, but we have been working on that for a long time to try and standardize times in cities. And the Barcelona City Council started with time policies in 2003, and in 2006 it already promoted the setup of the NUST network, New Time Uses, the network of companies. So there's a key role played by municipalities to a greater or lesser extent, not only in the city of Barcelona, but this is being implemented elsewhere. So it's quite an important challenge that has to be approached. And my last element has to do with company plans. Something that the News Network proposed was to set up a prize, an award to recognize innovative companies in this sphere. And we have, in the last decade, 40 awarded companies, and maybe we had like 15 to 20 shortlisted companies every year. And these companies have to submit their project, and the project is like a plan. And we always ask them if they have an equality plan in place. Of course, equality plans include work-life balance as a dimension. So the working time organization element opens up and links beautifully with other elements. It has an impact on equality plans, so they feed each other. And the jury, of course, asks specific questions and assesses the companies according to those. And we always ask, what is the corporate culture in terms of the promotion of that change? And workers, if we're talking about an SME, about a small company without a collective bargaining, well, through whatever mechanisms they have in place, it's always important to hear, to listen to the workers, or the documentation mechanisms. The whole company has to be up to speed, there has to be transparency, and then all other working time organization measures. This is an experience that is worth mentioning here, and maybe we can take it into account when it comes to devising the strategies that you're proposing here. Hello, I'm a biologist from Argentina. A very short remark, something that Raquel said in passing. You mentioned the algorithms, or the way in which we measure time preferences compared to shift work or night work. Well, we need to be very careful with that, because it can entail discrimination. I have presented before unions very often, so they understand that we will select employees according to their chronotype. So the early birds would be included in the day shift, and the night owls would be elected for the night shift. So we need to be careful, because this is well intended, but it can be risky. Okay, so after Rojo Torrecilla's remarks, he was my professor. I'm Àngels Pujol, secretary at the Labour Relations Council in Catalonia. I wanted to say that we're very lucky here in Catalonia, because we have a lot of collective bargaining, and its key role has to do with working time management. Since 2008, when the council was set up, and Raquel Serrano was the first secretary of the council, we have been working with recommendations, collective bargaining recommendations in the field of working time management. Of course, this includes the unions, the employers' organizations of Catalonia, and the Catalan government. But we've been doing this since 2008. And then there was an agreement with 8 goals for collective bargaining, to rationalize working time. And during the pandemic, awful time, always through the consensus of the three parties, we decided to prioritize essential workers, and we also issued recommendations for home office. And we're currently working on content for a digital disconnection protocol, a model that can be useful for companies that must develop digital disconnection policies. And just like the other documents issued by the Council, well, there's a document in which on which unions and employers' organizations and the Catalan government agree. So it's music to my ears what I've been listening to throughout the afternoon, because apparently, we have the engagement of the main unions and employers' organizations. So I think that in Catalonia we are quite lucky. We are going down a path that focuses on covering the elements that are not covered by the law for whatever reason. But working time, as Raquel said, is one of the thorniest discussions to have in a collective bargaining. Because each workspace or sector is very unique. So you cannot standardize, but it's a key element that has to be included in the law, but above all in collective bargaining. Thank you.
Ya estamos, parece ser. Pues,
That's about it. Okay, so back to the panel.
vale. Perdón que me olvido de la gente que está.
Oh, apologies. I totally forgot about those of you connected online. You can also take part in the discussion. If you want to post your questions, they will be handed to us and we will ask your questions to the panelists. But meanwhile, let's get started. So, would you like to start? You are enthusiastic.
Por supuesto, pero sí que algunas reflexiones, ¿no? A propósito de...
Well, I think the microphone or the microphone is not working. The microphone is not on. Now, yes. Let's see.
¿Has agotado el tiempo, Raquel? No, ves que a mí se me...
I was a... fue la comunicación.
You were understanding it.
Sí, vale.
Okay, now we're in business. Concept of working time. It is true that in the working group, in the task group, we looked at the foreseeability, and from the rule clarify what is working time, what is not, bearing in mind all the jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice ratified and what our Supreme Court has said. It's not just a question of looking at working time, it's also a question of looking at the localization of many works and the need to limit the time when you are available for the company, available for work. But even though it's not it's company time, although you may not be working, right? Where you're on call. So it's not just a question of limiting effective working time, but time when we have got the work on our mind because we're on call. And so in the working group, we have looked at that. It's one of the proposals to be specific. What is and what is not working time? So we say what is not working time is when your time is your own. Right? Time for rest. And then if we look at the collective bargaining, and that response is one of the questions which is made over there, well, obviously, collective bargaining, I have said so, is key, is essential, because there are many matters which cannot be regulated from law. It's perhaps too rigid. Collective bargaining is key. in which brings together trade unions and works councils and, if you like, shop stewards committees. At least in Spain, that is what it's called. We look at agreeing on interruptions, on rest times, on what is working time, and there's a compulsion to negotiate on working time that is enshrined in law. It is essential. The question which you were making on compacting working time, pauses, breaks, how do we conciliate the fact that breaks are important from a health point of view, but that, of course, can be negative for, if you like, family life balance. I don't know whether that was your question. The question is how to find the balance precisely between what would be breaks and the viewpoint of health are key, but can go against this compacting and this, if you like, life-work balance. Now, there's something else. We should not lengthen working day because there may be activities where there breaks. You can have a long day. It's long because there are 3 or 4 breaks. So careful, because these interruptions in excessive breaks during the day can work against, if you like, conciliation of rights. It's a great pity that Emmy is not in the room, but she was saying something very, very interesting. The question of, well, at the end of the day, today we facing new types of work, hybrid models, and new insidious inequality can come into play. Because in the service sector, where there is a high presence of women, and we have the phenomenon of the sticky soil, where it's not possible to work hybrid, to work remotely. Distance working is not possible in that sense. And that adds, if you like, a penalty in terms of life-work balance for the service sectors. So we're talking of sectors with high women's presence in the service sector, and there we need to improve conditions, higher salaries, because they're very low value added jobs. And we need to carry out improvement in those sectors and to ensure that these women, because they tend to be women, could also have a professional trajectory, because this is not the case in the sticky floor sector, so-called sticky floor. Now I say that algorithms and IT programs and apps which could facilitate that people could introduce their individual preferences. It is true that has opened up a field for discrimination, leaves the door wide open to discrimination. Algorithms have access to a lot of personal data. Thank goodness the individual options in terms of timetables keep changing along life. It's not. We're not just talking about sex, religion, and age. This can be treated, and yet it is true that the algorithm discrimination can happen. We have to combat that, but there will be changing. It won't be a sort of condition set in stone, because currently, and I'm speaking at a personal level, I have conciliation needs that I didn't have 10 years ago because I have young kids. But there is an algorithm discrimination risk. That is true. I don't know, doing something else which I haven't touched upon. I don't know. Let me add, and I think online questions, I would like to state that one of the things which have nuanced, you've talked of awareness, you've talked of a cultural change. It is clear that the law helps. Laws do push open doors, but before and after the law, there must be awareness. That is essential. In that sense, one of the proposals and this does have an economic cost, is that the state can or should be able to carry out awareness creation campaigns to both citizens and within companies and productive sectors. So awareness creation vital. And there's a question from somebody from the Council of Work Relations. We've read your studies, and they are definite, if you like, publications which you are bearing very much in mind here. Yeah, that's fine. It's fine. It's good. It does work. Yeah. No. Yeah, it does work. Yeah. What I need to say is that I wish to insist on 2 points I think are key. As Eduardo was saying, it is very important to bear in mind collective bargaining in these highly complex matters. One thing is 38, 36, 37 and a half hours, because the maths don't add up. It's very, very complex. It's complex as carrying out very complex maths, or adding up, right, or sums. So, but it is important to reinforce what is very important, and I have studied labor law, which is an imperative law. This imperative law is no longer mentioned, and I do think when it comes to working time, we must claim one of the key points which should always be minimum protection standard, and that has changed with time, and that's something we must bear in mind. And last, we must bear in mind that if we look at healthy time, which has to do with what our French colleague was mentioning, breaks can be physically good, but are they good mentally today? What is physically healthy may not be mentally healthy. I may need to have a break of half an hour because my legs ache, but maybe mentally what I want to do is to finish as quickly as possible, but I just need to get home as quickly as possible. So that's a contradiction there. So the future, how to a regulation which covers everything, and I think that this balance, this is the problem which allows what is the minimum indispensable, which we must be regulated with the mandatory rules, and more other aspects which can be flexible and can be a subject of collective bargaining, right? So that I make that distinction. I think I didn't know that any of the questions were for me, but you are pressing me to intervene. So final reflection, which is collective bargaining, which has awoken quite a lot of interest. If collective bargaining has advanced, which is true, it has, but we must go further, because in terms of digital disconnection or overtime hours, which I haven't commented because of lack of time, in certain aspects, collective bargaining, collective agreements are ambiguous. 2 examples, and we'll close from my point of view. Digital disconnection, right. 2, there are measures to that end to make it specific, and yet there are exceptions are envisaged, or moments when the company can interrupt the right to digital disconnection, and there are other moments when these interruptions of these rights are generalized, not very specific, ambiguous even. And we should be able to move forward, in particular when we refer to the compulsory nature thereof. Normally, overtime hours tend to be voluntary in nature, but there are some collective agreements say, no, these overtime hours will be carried out on a random fashion in cases of emergency, and the times are not specified. So much remains to be done in that field. Thanks ever so much. I think we have minutes. There are a few questions which have come from the cloud, from those who are following us online. I'll put them all together, and then you shall answer. Now, if the eccentric, the rather strange time zone which Spain is completely wrong for its natural time, if it has a bearing on this, because we have the same time zone as Poland, to put Jeff's comment, who is then Miguel Basterra says, congratulations. He says that all your proposals are justifiable. If only one of these proposals came out, which would it be, in your view? The classic tongue-in-cheek question. And then another question from Anna, who says, some clue of how to tackle addiction to screens, right? And working shifts. Is there a chance that that may be something chosen voluntarily by the employee? And then my question, I'll qualify all this. This question of the 4-day working week, much has been mentioned about that. Are you contemplating it? Have you mentioned it? Is it part of your proposals? And this is a beefy question which can't be answered in 3 minutes. Which are a continuous working day, or one that's split up, or that's a tricky question, right? I don't in schools. Is that something? There's a big debate in Spain currently on the school class time. It's a can of worms, in a sense. Well, I'll look at Jeff. No, I'm afraid the speaker's microphone doesn't work. The speaker's microphone doesn't work. No, the speaker's microphone doesn't work. I'm afraid interpreters say that the speaker's microphone doesn't work. No. Okay, won't have to choose just one proposal, but I think if I had to choose one, speaking personally, would be that collective agreements should have to negotiate in working times to guarantee sustainability and co-responsibility. It should be mandatory. Now, the 4-day working week. I think it is important to go back there. Collective bargaining. This cannot be established by law. It's pointless. What is sensible is that if we look at the plan of time usage, could contemplate that. What could be done to reduce the working day? It can be done in a non-mandatory fashion. It can be done on a voluntary basis. But to limiting overtime, but actually say that the working time should be shared out forcibly in 4 days. We can't make that mandatory. We'll allow for more flexibility. But the collective bargaining should include that. The time zones. This is a long, thorny debate and touches on many other subjects. This morning, Dr. Buqueras, who was with us, attempted to carry out a law in Spain on time uses for 3 times. Dr. Buqueras was telling us that one of the subjects the last time they attempted it to carry out a proposal in law for time use, they brought both debates together, time use and the debate on the time zone. It is true that there are points of intersection, but there are 2 different debates. It is clear that Spain is in the wrong time zone. That's clear. We're in the Central European time zone, and it has been said that our time zone comes from the Franco era for political reasons, and Franco put us in the same time zone as Nazi Germany, right? as a sop to Nazi Germany, an ally of Franco. So in that sense, as an organization, BTUI are absolutely in favor of us going to our natural time zone, but it is not something that should be mixed up with a law on uses of time. There has to be a consensus and an agreement with member states, and it goes way beyond the competence of just us. You talk to schools. It is a subject which does directly affect us, and the proposal is clear. The objectives are clear. Proposals which should be stated when we organize about time use in schools should respond to the needs for health and improving the educational outcomes and yield and work-life balance. The compacting of timetables is something which does not contribute to any of these targets and objectives, and we thus would propose that there should be a clear, rigorous study which looks at the consequences and moves towards the Portuguese model, whereby you have schools open with a greater timetable flexibility. And I said it before, this does not mean either more classroom hours or more contact hours or that teachers work more, but simply that there should be time for some extra-school activities and for relaxation. We'll be working on that, and we're working with organizations who are looking at socialization education. And last but not least, screen addiction. It's one of the evils of our times, isn't it? And in that sense, I do think we should move forward towards awareness, creation of these screens. There should be many, many campaigns of information, and be stricter with programs at night time, very late night time for kids and teenagers. No way they should be screened at that late hour. Well, Miguel has asked us directly. I would say that he is part of the team. He's not with us today, but this would be a rather particular point, but it's impossible to talk of what could be a specific proposal. The best one is how do we ensure that all the citizens be aware and take it on board, so that working time should be the centre of labour policies is something essential. I think that's an absolute priority, and there's a legal aspect. A last comment, Danielle? No, I agree. Great. Well, that's it. We have no time. These few minutes, I'll carry a summary of the session. We started off justifying why we need a law. Martin said that time is a political question. Of course it is. We need to guarantee the right to time. And much has been said about the Spanish exception. Everyone who lives in Spain is fully aware of that. But figures have been put to it. We were the country that first introduced the 8-hour day, and the split working day conditions our lives and our daily activities. 10% people work beyond 9 p.m. Big percentage work in their free time, some extend their working day. The change of concept to 888, which we all have ingrained in a way to introduce care, right? And thinking of future laws. Ana Gines has talked about the Spanish issue, as we were saying, how it is difficult to strike a life-work balance, especially for women, who are the ones who have most part-time contracts, how will affect productivity. And then we have moved to the international framework and the sovereignty, time sovereignty at the place of work, and the obligation, even if we're just for a legal reason, why we should have a law, because we have to do transfer the content of the directives to Spanish law. That is mandatory, by the way. We have looked at other matters. What does rest mean? What does a break mean? What is work-life balance? We've looked about all these subjects, and then Raquel has looked at the kernel of the session with proposals, with objectives. Let me remind you, foreseeability, the working hours, and let's look at safe and secure working conditions, looking at breaks, if the worker should have enough time to organize his own breaks.
Aquí, perdón, sí, la sostenibilidad.
Sustainability, the margin to organize one's own work, and how can we make compatible interests of companies, of workers, limits to overtime hours, co-responsibility, we talk about the rights of to be present and absent, the right to adapt working hours by every hour, then that's a matter which has been mentioned. It's in the collective agreements. They will help the variability there. And much has been said, I think. Raquel, about participation of workers, which is a basic subject, and I don't know, and like I know there's so many policies in companies, so you could give an opinion, let their opinion or share their opinion on the working times. Danielle has talked about the collective agreements. 38. The average is 38.5 to 39 hours per week. With the extra or overtime hours. The question with the agreements is that we are very slowly, very slowly moving towards the interests of the workers. There's a bit more flexibility coming into stream. We reduce working hours. There's a trend to increase breaks. Flexible times, we have mentioned the possibility of flexi time, coming into starting work in a flexible manner, and the same with leaving time. And Marta has talked to us of other matters which ought to be borne in mind when it comes to regulating time uses, to harmonize working times, because as you were saying, working times do mark us as a society, and has mentioned 8 areas for change: governance, transversal approach, the government should have a leading role, organizing, also timetables in the public service, and let me mention the interest of journalists. And often because after all, we have to follow you. And you are the one saying, hey, writing to politicians saying, what can you do to cut back your unsocial hours? Research, we need data, we need specific data to then be able to advise change, education, to health, this movement. I I didn't know that there was a movement saying let's start school classes at 9:30. And I do write a lot on education. Ooh, that is a tricky one, right? We talked about sustainability, energy saving, rural areas. We often forget about the people out in rural areas. We always think in terms of cities. And I would say, as if they weren't affected by a time question. We talked about trade, consumer patterns. I come from Madrid. It's terrible. It's terrible. Everything is open. The sort of the 24/7 culture, and harmonize the prime time programs, which is so very late, to bring it forward, and the importance of municipalities. Looking at laws in France and Italy, and the municipalities should take a leading role in time uses in their activities, extra school activities, sports activities, and so on and so forth. I think I'll call it a day. Looking, yes, basically improve all these matters which are essential, and where young people are beginning to have their voice heard. Is an element to increase productivity, to contribute to energy saving, conciliation, physical and emotional and psychological health, and is the basis for new rights. And we mentioned the importance of trade unions, collective bargaining, going beyond the immediate questions, looking at a longer term view, and could also be mentioned in Catalonia. There are some elements in collective negotiation, and I think that's it. So that is all. Thank you ever so much. Those of you who are here, those of you who are at home. It's a long session. My apologies. We leave you. I think at 5:30 there's a session which also looks very interesting. The organization of time. The key factor for inequality in the labour market. Thank you.
A ver, esto.